to thank all these people like Jim Christino and Jim and Tricia Midville and John Perry. I mean, a lot of
David
Glenda to make our stay here as comfortable as it could possibly be, in spite of lack of sleep. They weren't able to help me on that. So just to go back, you know, I heard Baba, I started working at the center in the 70s, and women would come, and you know, I was kind of troubled by what was Mayor Baba doing in his work with the women mandala. They were kept very secluded, away from the world. They, for a long time, they were living up on Mehrabad Hill, upper Mehrabad, behind this stone wall. No contact with the outside world, no contact with men. Mara was not able to even hear a man's name. And is this a reenactment of the Muslim Purdah? Women are kind of, and it's an understandable question, and I felt I had to have some answer for that. I couldn't just say, oh, well, that's just Baba's way, or it's all a mystery, like the Catholic priests sometimes tell you, you know. I had to come up with something. So I put this before Baba, you know. Baba, I want some answer to this. So years roll by, and I went to India on one occasion, and we went up to Sakori. Sakori is where Pasni Maharaj had his ashram. And then after as he was passing on, he passed his ashram, ahead of it was Godavari Mai. So we went up there, and there were all these nuns, all women, very peaceful place, you know, very quiet. And while I was there, I got a book of Pasni Maharaj's discourses. And in one of the discourses, he's talking about the complementary role of husband and wife in Hindu society. This is back in the early 1900s. And he starts out by saying there are three types of impressions in their tradition. The first is the Sattvic impressions, which are very pure, innocent, light, very nurturing impressions. The next kind of impressions are the Rajasic impressions. Those are the impressions you pick up out in the world when you go to work and all of that. Those are heavier. And then, of course, there's Tamasic impressions, which are kind of basically less greed and anger and all of those impressions. So, Pasni Maharaj says that the wife embodies these Sattvic impressions, these kind of pure, more innocent, and the children are brought up in an atmosphere that's appropriate to them, more innocent. The husband goes out to work, provides for the family. He picks up the heavier impressions, and those heavier impressions, they come to the home, and they're dissolved in the lighter impressions that are maintained, and nurturing impressions maintained by the wife. Now remember, this is way back early 1900s. Things have changed since then. And so then Pasni Maharaj said that these nuns, he had over 70 nuns living in a very secluded life there. And he said these nuns do the same, they do the same thing for the world. The heavy impressions from the world come to this ashram, and they are purified. So I thought, maybe that's what was happening up at the hill at Mehrabad. You know, and so when I would be asked, what were the women doing and everything, I would at least offer this as an explanation. Maybe they are working, taking on the impressions of the world, and they're being drawn there to Upper Mehrabad. But Pasni Maharaj kind of implied that the women were not aware of this higher purpose that they were involved in. They were just they were living their very circumscribed life, under Upasana. Then a few years go by, and there's a woman out in Colorado, which is in the heart of America, and she has a past life recollection in which she sees herself in the gas chambers, and they're all, they're dying
In Nazi Germany in World War II.
in World War II. And she sees them, they're falling on their knees, they're saying their prayers, they're holding on to each other. That you can imagine, horrendous scene in the gas chambers. Afterwards, after they all pass on, they are carried all together, and they come to this beautiful place. It's like a hillside, and there's such a nurturing atmosphere coming from this hillside with a few buildings. And down below from one of the buildings, there is this exquisite chant that's coming up to them. And then they're there for a certain length of time, and then they go on to the next phase of the afterlife. And then a year later, this woman hears about Baba, and she, someone convinces her to go to Mehrabad. So she goes, arrives at Lower Mehrabad, signs in. As she's coming up the hill, this is the hill that they all came to. And as she's going up the hill, and she comes to the top of the hill, and she's going toward the tomb, that very chant is being sung, the 7 names of God. A chant that Baba had written the words to and the melody. And the women, Mandali, he had them singing that song during the war years, in the morning and in the afternoon, every day. And the women Mandali on that particular day, they used to come over every 2 weeks to Baba's tomb to pay their respects. And so it was the women Mandali who were actually singing this song as this woman approached. So I thought, wow, that seems to kind of corroborate this whole thing, And then, a couple years later, I was in the refectory, and this woman was sharing something that Mara had said to her. Mara had said that Baba had told her that all of the people from the concentration camps passed through the upper room. Now, she thought it was the upper room at Marazad, because that's where, Baba stayed, at night, in the upper room at the main house in Marazad. But Baba didn't start staying at Marazad until 1944. So I think it was the upper room at Upper Mehrabad on the tower there, where the eastern and western women were staying. So I thought, wow, and I put a lot of caveats, like, well, maybe this is it, maybe that, and somehow it got in a newsletter, a Washington, D.C. letter, because there was a Sahabas up there, and I went up there, and so when I was going next time to India, I thought, oh my God, what if that article got over there, and some of the women are still living, and I'm kind of presumptuous making this, what I just told you, and so I got there, and there was a woman named Terry Barton. And she came up to me, she said, she was walking with Marwan Jessawala down the approach road. And he said, did you read that letter by Jeff Wolverton? And she said, yes, I was there in Washington, D.C. when he shared that. And Marwan said, Baba is now letting out the secrets. So I felt, wow, you don't have to worry about that. So now I'll share just a little bit of 3 of Baba's women that were connected to the center. That's Elizabeth Patterson, Kitty Davey, and Margaret Pratt.
Excuse me, Jess.
Yeah.
Did you take it that Marwan was saying he knew that already, or was he saying it in a more general sense?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, just letting out the secrets. These things, and he didn't.
Yeah.
But he would always have me share what I just shared with you in Mandalay Hall for a number of years. Yeah. So he felt convinced that this was what Baba was doing. But, because it's an unusual thing, this very secluded, circumscribed life behind walls that they're living, but they're performing this great service for the world. and even the heaviness of the concentration camps were coming through.
Were any of the women mandali confirming?
You know, I don't remember. I actually didn't, take Mary Rue aside and say, hey, did you read that article? I
They
did.
also wouldn't necessarily have known why Baba
Yeah,
was having to
yeah.
do that, and in
Yeah.
fact, it was like,
Yeah.
why Baba was having to do it.
Yeah, I got the sense that they were not aware of that higher purpose that they were participating in, of Baba's work. So anyway, so the three of those people, well, there were four, three I'll talk about. Elizabeth Patterson was one of them in the upper room. Norina Machiavelli was up there. Margaret Krask and Kitty Davy. So I'll say a little bit of my experience with them. It just reminded me, I just flashed. Margaret Krask, there were some people that were put on silence. I mean, this is not part of that. And they would just talk repeatedly, just with their gestures and everything. And it just drove Margaret crazy because they were just very talkative. That's why some of them were put on silent because they were so talkative. So she, one evening they're kind of going like this and talking back and forth and they're driving her crazy. So she went over and shut off the light. That'll finish that. Margaret was very funny. So Elizabeth Patterson. Elizabeth Patterson, during the East-West gathering, you see that yogi beside at Baba's right side. And at one point, Elizabeth Patterson was on the left side. And Baba said, here are my two yogis, Eastern yogi and a Western yogi. Now, you wouldn't necessarily think of Elizabeth Patterson as a yogi. I mean, she was like, she had fallen off a horse when she was a child, so her back was kind of bent and she was a little bit wide by that time. But she was so internally disciplined, so measured, so serene at the deepest level. She didn't just talk off the top of her head. Those words were coming from a very serene place, And she had a very commanding presence. And if you weren't careful, you could feel like a buck private in front of a five-star general, That didn't appeal to me. I would prefer to think of her as an elderly aunt and I was a nephew. That was a little more real. But some people were like intimidated. And Tex Hightower, one of Margaret's dancers, describes her as she was coming toward him one occasion as the Rock of Gibraltar on roller skates with these laser beam blue eyes. Kitty and Elizabeth had these eyes that they just looked a lot farther into your life than you normally, most people do. In fact, a little uncomfortably so. So that I had to kind of clean up my intentions and my thoughts and emotions around it because they were just able to look in a little. They weren't critical, but you kind of had a feeling they were looking in kind of deeply at a little how it must have been around Baba, looking in. But Elizabeth, she had an incredible sensitivity to the 500 acres of the center. And I think of it as like a cutaway dollhouse. One of those things where you can put, all the furniture in the dollhouse and everything. She saw the whole thing so clearly. And an example of that is one night there was she called the night watchman and told him very specifically to go out into the forest, not on any path, not on any road, an uncharted part of the forest. She told him very specifically where to go. So the guy goes out there with his flashlight and everything to where she was saying. There's one of the guests that's there weeping and panic-stricken because they had gotten lost. So here's Elizabeth a mile away. She's picking up on the radar a very specific location of somebody. One time I did my night watch on Saturday. Sunday morning I'm sitting in the original kitchen, overlooking the lake, having my breakfast, and I get a call from Elizabeth. normally she wouldn't call me in the morning, but she said that she wanted me to go down to the beach. I said, well, Elizabeth, I'm eating breakfast now. Do you want me to finish my breakfast and go down, or shall I go down right away? There's a pause on the phone, and she says, no, finish your breakfast and go down. So I finish my breakfast, not in any hurried way. I get in the truck and I'm heading down to the beach. I pass the barn, and on the beach road, there are a group of 13 people, trespassers, coming onto the center. So how did she know that? Even that I could finish my breakfast, you know? So, I mean, I drove them back to the beach, you know, and I told them if they want to come to the center, they can come through the main office and they can get a tour. And when Elizabeth passed on, Kitty said, you know, she didn't shed a tear. But a month later, see, Elizabeth had a connection with the black community in Myrtle Beach. A month later, the black community came up and they got Kitty Davy and Charles and took them down to a church. And in the church, people stood up and they all said what Elizabeth had done for them. You know, she put in roads. You know, they had just dirt roads. They had no septic system. She put in septic systems for them. They didn't have a clinic. She helped to finance the clinic. She bought people trailers when their trailers burnt. She had a very intimate connection. And Kitty had no idea. I mean, she knew she was doing something down there, and all of us kind of knew she had something to do down there. But she had no idea how much Elizabeth had done, and that was then Kitty couldn't help but weep. So that, now Kitty was kind of the social director of the center and the nearby community. And she was, I mean, Bob had said that she had been St. Teresa of Avila, you know, and I have a feeling in this incarnation she was probably not more fun to be with. She was like very whimsical, kind of full of malapropisms and everything. And I could always tell who had gone to see Kitty, because when they came back into the center, they were just beaming. You know, it was clear, oh, that person had gone to see Kitty. And Kitty had a real intuitive sense, but she was somehow not quite aware of it. So, like, somebody would come in, a couple of my friends of mine, and they come in and say, "Oh, good, congratulations, you're going to have a child." Well, Kitty, no, we're not planning to have any more children. Oh, I must have you mixed up with somebody else. And when they go back to their hometown and they find out a week later she's pregnant. So things like that used to happen to Kitty, and people would line up to see Kitty in her office. And it got to be so many people that Kitty just decided to streamline the whole thing, you know, the whole introduction. She would say, "Are you a book or a problem?" Meaning, have you come for a book, or do you want to have you come to bring your problems? But a new person, you know, are you a book or a problem? I mean, what do you say to that? Very whimsical. And she had, you know, had a lot of malapropisms that were very funny. Like, for example, there was a couple, Sir Thomas and Lady Dorothy Hopkinson they were a distinguished couple from England, and they had arrived. He was a famous journalist. And while they're at the door of Dilrube, the main house where Kitty and Elizabeth lived, there was a woman named Edith Bradbury who had a long connection with Baba. She was 84 at the time, and she was being helped out of the house into a car. And right there to the Hopkinson, she says, "Oh, that's Edith Bradbury. She suffers from gonorrhea." And Charles kind of bumped elbows at, "No, I'm sure I saw a TV program the other night. She has gonorrhea." She had glaucoma. There, 84. Oh my God. She did stuff like that. She was Let's see if I can, let's see if I can, if there's another one here I can think of. I didn't, let's see if I can think of.
Do you have any stories about her when she would be talking with you in the office and the telephone would ring?
Right.
Do you remember?
Yeah, she'd just pick up the phone
As
and,
she's talking to you.
yeah. And yes, I know you're having problems with homosexuality. Don't worry about it. Nobody, it will only stay here in this office. Oh, hello. He was like a scream. Yeah. One day, Jane Haynes, who was one of the directors of the center, was having eye trouble, with her eyes and everything. And Wendy had called from Washington, D.C. And got Kitty on the phone and said, "How's my mom doing?" "Oh, she went to the optimist and he said she's going to be all right." They're just like very off-the-wall stuff.
She also, they're probably all too long stories, but she would give people very odd advice, and they would follow her advice. I mean, one of them was somebody going to Israel, but it's like a 15-minute story. It'd be career advice, and they would follow the trajectory. It would lead them in a whole different way, but it was, how would she know to have them do that? I mean, there was too many, and then they take too long, but
she was delightful. Trying to think of some of those.
A real cute one was when we were married November 6th in 76, and then if you remember back then at Christmas time, Elizabeth and Kitty would have all the nearby community come into the Daruba. There'd be a fire roaring in the fireplace.
He'd be sitting on the floor and she was sitting up on her chair.
Yeah, and so we came in and we said, "Oh, Kitty, we have some very good news. We're pregnant." And she said, "Oh, really? So soon?"
Oh, I just remembered one. Shireen, this is Baba's niece, was coming from England to the center. She was just 16 years old. And Kitty had heard that she had a horrible, extreme phobia of snakes. And so, in the month before she came, Kitty would, anytime you saw her, now, don't mention snakes. Don't mention the snake at all. She's like, she's terrified of snakes. If you find one on the center, if you kill one, don't tell her. So she's going on every time you see her. Oh, now remember, don't talk about snakes. She's, And so finally, Shireen arrives after a month of hearing, Kitty's admonitions, and she comes to the door and welcomes her in and says, "Oh, Shireen, would you like a cup of snakes?" Blew the whole thing out of the water. So anyway, I'll just mention a little bit about Margaret Krass. Now, when Margaret Krass was in her 90s, she had always shared stories of her times with Bob in her life. This was a story that didn't emerge until her 90s, and she remembered it. When she was a little girl, they were staying on a summer place north of London, and they heard some noise in the back of the house. So she and her mother stepped out of the, peeked out of the door, and there were some gypsies. As soon as they saw Margaret, they said, "She is the one that has the link with the expected one." She was only like either 8 or 12, I can't remember. And then the next night, the next evening they came, they brought the entire band of gypsies. And they said, she's the one that has the link with the expected one. She'll go all over the world and tell people about him. So then, when Baba came to England in 31, one of the first things that Baba said to Margaret, "You are my link to the West." This little old lady here, you are my link to the West. And then when he sent her back in, I think it was 47, And as she was going, Baba said, now remember, you're my link to the West. But she might have been the most perceptive of, Elizabeth and Kitty. She had these very clear, she was so clear, she didn't miss anything. If you were doing a little trick over here or something like that, she was on top of it. She was really on top of things. And she was very kind of forthright. For example, there was here's the kind of comment. I mean, she had a great sense of humor, and she kept the women, Mandalay and Baba, entertained. But there was a buddy of mine. In the latter years, she stayed at Happy House in the center, and there were a number of us that would have a shift, an evening shift with her. I had one shift. There's a guy named David Silverman who had a particular shift with her. He was about 45 years old, a little bit on the nerdy side. He always wore blue pants and white dress shirts, kind of almost like like a grocery store manager or something like that. Always, and so he's there with her one night. Now she's 96 and he's 45, and he says, Margaret, you know how I've always wanted to find someone to share my life with, someone to marry, who would be with me and we could share life together, a soulmate. And then he looks over at Margaret and says, Margaret, if you were younger, I would have asked for your hand. And Margaret says, I'm sorry, David, but I had in mind a much younger man. A friend of mine came and he was going for a walk with her, and he said, Margaret, I don't know what I did in my last life to deserve the privilege of knowing about Baba and following him in this life. I don't know what I did. And he had this nice contact with Baba and everything. Margaret stops in the road on her cane. She says, what makes you think he was attracted by your good points? That's kind of the way. She was always coming at things at a slightly different angle. And she would, Kitty had her office on just off of the veranda, and Margaret would sometimes sit there on the, just sit in the sunlight on a chair. So this young woman comes along, and Margaret says, who are you? Kind of very direct. Oh, I'm so-and-so, I'm new to Baba. Good, you still have time to escape. So she was a kid. Beautiful. So anyway, I spent years with these people, but anyway, that's...
I want to mention Jane, because I don't know if you were going to get, the last woman who lived with all these other women, also was much more involved in the larger community than you knew, and there was a wonderful funeral for her in the Black Church when she died in 95 or 96. And people came forward with stories that people were in jail, people were in mental hospital, people who suffered. She had the public life that we all knew about, and then she also looked after. She wrote to people all around the country and kept them going in hard times. And she was an odd mixture. Sometimes she would swear like a sailor, and she could also talk in a very kind of fancy upper class Southern Belle voice. She was very multi-dimensional and sort of controversial, but she was much beloved. She knew of a family that got burnt out of their house, and she made sure that they had housing. And that family, for many years, came on Thanksgiving and they put a concert on for us. This is a black family from way far in the woods, and somebody in my family got murdered very soon after I came to Baba, a young girl. And the mother and the brother came down. They're not Baba lovers, but they came down to the center. And Jane was just beautiful. She'd never met them before and wouldn't probably ever meet them again. But she was so present with them and just sort of said all the right things. So,
Okay, yeah.
Something about Elizabeth, you were talking about how so intimidating her presence was, how powerful, right?
Yeah.
When I was at the center, I think it was my first time in the 70s, early 70s, she was probably about 70 meters away, and I saw her, and I realized that if I kept going the same way I was going, we were going to run into each other. And I just turned in my tracks and went the other way.
Uh-huh.
That power, I knew that I could not face this woman.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happened the rest of the trip, but I had that one memory of seeing that I would meet her, but
Yeah.
I just knew I couldn't handle it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Nadja Coatwell was there while they were working on building up the center. She would come down. She's a wonderful Indian woman in public health. She was studying in the United States, and she'd come down every week, and she said Elizabeth knew where she wanted, I mean, when she put a cabin in the walkway, she knew where the routes, you know, which routes to take out, which routes she was, the cabins are very beautifully situated, and there's little walkways up to them. And we sort of take it for granted. She said that was all. Elizabeth had a deep sense of beauty. She had a. If you ever get a chance, see some of the pictures of her and Normina from the 30s. I meant to bring some with me, especially at Oceano, because we see them in their formal roles. It's kind of neat. You see them sitting around in jeans with their hands in their pocket and their little shirts. You know, they were also regular people and sort of hung out with the same kind of people we hang out with. And they brought, Baba to Los Angeles and to Oceano. You can sort of see the whole bigger picture if you look at them in the 30s. But she said she was like a general, but a sort of like the super artistic general, which is two things you don't normally put together. Incredible sense of beauty.
Jeff,
Yeah.
so Baba had specific names for them, and I remember Elizabeth was Delruba, the stealer of hearts.
Stealer of hearts.
And Kitty was Saroja, the
Yeah.
lotus. And that's, the house is named Delruba, the library is Saroja. But what was Margaret's? I don't remember.
Was she Leela? No.
Sulika.
What was it?
Sulika.
Salika?
Sulika.
Sulika. Oh, Sulaika.
Sulika.
Sulaika.
Sorry.
That was the,
Speaking travel.
she was, Sulaika was, Joseph's, yeah, she was the wife of the king.
The wife of the Pharaoh, yeah.
Of the Pharaoh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yep, Zuleika, who fell in love with Joseph, who was considered in the Sufi tradition the most beautiful, handsome human being ever on earth. He was, and the women fell in love with him. Yeah.
Just on those names, Barbara gave them those names at East Chalco. At the very first meeting, that was one of the things that happened. And there were people, some of the people that travelled on with him to Europe, such as Albanians, were also given names. So there's
Yeah.
a number of women that were given names from that.
Hey, you remind me of something. I'm going to read something that someone wrote, because in East Chalacombe there was a man named Kenneth Ross who played the bagpipes for Bob. Darwin used to say the definition of a gentleman, someone who knows how to play the bagpipes and doesn't. But, and one of his daughters, they met Baba in either 52 or 56. I think they met Baba in 56. And one of them was named Rosie. She met Baba when she was 7. And she wrote this down, and I made her send it to me. Meeting Baba, 7 years old in New York. I was 7. Do I remember? Oh yes, forever. All time ceased. I walked into a great circle of light and complete protection. No one, no thing, no sound. Only the essence and the voice of the silent one. How could that be? What did he say? Where was I? Enclosed in light, where no harm could penetrate. No harm. I was lifted up. The circle was beyond where I could sense. Great light, love light blinded me with the enormity of this happening. I was 7. Do I now understand how incredible this event was on eternity's clock? Have problems vanished? No. Have challenges eluded me? No. Do I cry? Yes. Tears of joy, fear, love, hope for the less sensitive humanity. Have I been hurt? Yes. Deeply by many people. Am I vulnerable? Oh yes. Vulnerable to the pain my physically and mentally fragile family have endured. Vulnerable to the horror of man harming man, and to anger and unkindness in our world. Why have I been so blessed? I have this knowing. I have love. I am so small, He is so great. What can I give? The only gift worth sharing. That in all the turmoil, misunderstandings, confusions, mistakes, wars, tumult, there is hope. There is love. How can I be so brazen? I have a responsibility because I glimpsed God. The Lord made hair. He is real. I sat on the lap of God.
I want to mention two things. If none of you ever have, there's some wonderful videos, I hope they make it over here, of the dancers talking about their relationship with Baba, with Margaret, and who introduced them to Baba. And a lot of the dancers were, late teens or late 20s, and they were kind of the wild cards of the Baba people in the 50s. And they had a very fresh approach, and Margaret was just wonderful with them. And she's a great, one of the many wonderful role models of how to be with people. So I hope you have some of those over here. Tex Hightower, and they're very funny too. And what's the guy? The Tex. Who's the other one? Don Muller. Don Muller. If you get a chance to see some of those, Peter Saul, they're really wonderful. In the last few years, we had another neat woman around. Another funny lady, Adele Walken, came from Los Angeles. And she was just a treat to have in town, and that was very unusual, kind of wacky, kind of spacey, and especially if she was giving a talk, you never knew where she was going to go, but people just locked her house. I mean, she was like 90s.
95, I think.
95, and
She was the oldest
everybody
Baba
wanted
lover
to
on
be
earth
around
at
her.
one time. Yeah.
She was just in her own unusual way exuding Baba's love. So.
Her and Phyllis spent time at the apartment in New York, Marina, and
Yeah.
Years,
Yeah.
yeah.